Every one of us, every American, every elected official can do our part. Instead of giving in to cynicism and division, let's move forward with the confidence and optimism and unity that defines us as a people. For now is not a time for partisanship, it's a time for citizenship, a time to come together and work together with the seriousness of purpose that our national security demands.
Turns out not everyone's on board with that, unless you think coming together in a nonpartisan way as citizens and showing a seriousness of purpose about national security means blaming the problem of terrorism on health care reform. Really? An actual politician actually did that today. A United States Senator, in fact. Senator John Cornyn, chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, put out this statement in response to the president today. He said, quote, "I worry that the president's preoccupation with health care and other domestic issues has distracted him from what should be the fundamental role of our chief executive, keeping our nation and its citizenry safe from harm." In other words, hey, is there any way we can use this attempted terrorist attack as an excuse to try to stop health reform? What, is it too soon? Today, Republicans from John Cornyn to Michael Steele to Pete the Human Sieve Hoekstra to John Boehner to Michelle Bachmann to Mike Rogers to even little Todd Tiahrt, for crying out loud, all put out statements attacking President Obama on terrorism within moments of the president's remarks. As I said, John Cornyn's statement used terrorism to argue against health reform. Michael Steele's statement said Obama needs to recognize that terrorism is a threat. Because he doesn't? Pete Hoekstra's statement said he wants more intel released about Fort Hood. This coming from the guy who was too busy campaigning for governor in Michigan to actually attend a congressional briefing on Fort Hood. John Boehner's statement said the administration has reverted to a pre-9/11 mentality, as evidenced by the Obama administration trying the underpants bomber in civilian court, just like the Bush administration did after 9/11. Michelle Bachmann's statement said something, I'm sorry to say, was incomprehensible about lawyering up. Mike Rogers' statement said the Obama administration isn't committed to defeating terrorism. And little Todd Tiahrt put out a statement saying Janet Napolitano should resign, and it was God that stopped the underpants bomber. No, really. He said it was God who stopped the underpants bomber. And I'm quoting, "Were it not for an act of God, hundreds of lives would have been lost and our nation paralyzed. The time has come for Secretary Napolitano to immediately resign." Do you notice that there were no ellipses there? That's the way it went, that statement. That's really what he said. Janet Napolitano should resign and God gets a medal. You know, it's not like there were a ton of really rational responses from the Republican Party that I ignored in order to come up with this little compilation. This was pretty much the response from the opposition party today to the president's announcement on terrorism. This is what they've got to offer. God did it. Obama doesn't want to stop terrorism. When Bush did what Obama's doing, I was okay with it. Something inexplicable about lawyering up. And can we stop health reform now? That's what they're offering on terrorism. The president is back to pretty rhetorical flourishes about not being red states or blue states, but being united in serious purpose to face the policy challenges of the United States. I hope he is not holding his breath. Joining us now is David Korn, Washington bureau chief of Mother Jones Magazine, columnist for politicsdaily.com, and my buddy. David, it's good to see you here. Thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you, Rachel.
What would have happened if Democrats reacted to the shoe bomber back in 2001, 2002, the way Republicans have reacted to the underpants bomber?
I think it's fair to say that Dick Cheney would have arranged for secret trials and would have sent them all to Gitmo. I remember those days. I mean, the Democrats did not respond this way, the way that Republicans have responded for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, no one doubted that George Bush was serious about terrorism. Maybe they doubted his policies and they became obsessed with Iraq rather than Al-Qaeda. But, you know, yesterday, Liz Cheney put out a statement. You remember Liz Cheney, who sort of seems to be the medium, you know, channeling her father. You know, and I have it here. It said, "It's time for the president to make defending the nation his top priority." Now, how many weeks did President Obama spend on getting Afghanistan strategy organized? We may not like what he decided, but it seemed to be pretty much a top priority. And in terms of those Predator drone attacks that are hitting Pakistan, he's overseen far more of those than Bush and Cheney did in their last year in office. So, I mean, they can keep making these rhetorical points because maybe they play on some old prejudices about Democrats being weak on national security, but they have no basis in fact.
Well, and some of the not basis in fact is more pronounced than others. Rudy Giuliani, for example, went on CNN last night and said that the shoe bombing happened before 9/11. And that explains the difference in approach. It's a total lie and a weird one. Peter King, Jim DeMint, and all these guys keep saying that President Obama won't use the word terrorism, which is also a total lie and a weird one.
Yeah.
Is there a cost, ultimately, to that? Or does everybody just lie all the time in politics, and even the flagrant ones don't count for extra?
Well, people get away with these lies all the time. I think the cost is to the national discourse overall. I mean, these are serious issues, and they're real issues. National security versus civil liberties. There's actually a case to be made about trying people as enemy combatants as opposed to keeping them in civil criminal trials. I understand these are tough arguments, but we can't have them in a serious fashion and get to the best outcomes if you're throwing in weird lies like this. It shows that they're not really serious. If they want to engage, there's plenty to engage on. There are questions about, what to do with Guantanamo and so on that are very hard to wrestle with issues, but they're not serious.
I have to tell you, David, I without being snarky, I despair over this. I despair over this because there are real fights to have over the response to terrorism. There are real fights to have over health reform, but what did we do? We followed the Republicans' lead and spent all that time talking about death panels, which is made up.
Government takeover,
and on climate change. There's a lot of interesting ways to talk about the right way to respond to that, but instead it's climate gate. It's all made up, following the Republican framing into nonsense land. And we've ended up talking about stuff that is not real instead of talking about policy. I want to have policy fights. I don't want to be fighting with people who refuse to acknowledge reality.
Listen, Michael Steele put out a statement within half an hour of the president's speech today. So he did not even take an hour to think about what would be the reasonable Republican response. It was obviously ready to go beforehand. It shows, listen, these are existential questions for the United States. And they, whether it's Afghanistan or fighting Al-Qaeda and others, these are big things. If you can't put an hour worth of brain power into figuring out what you should do, and maybe actually you could say once in a while, well, I kind of agree with what the president said, or I disagree with here, I agree with that. But, without making everything a partisan attack. And I know it's his job to be partisan, but if all we do is see things through that prism, we won't reach the answers that we need to for these big challenges.
I am totally okay with partisan attacks. I love partisanship. I think partisanship helps. What I don't like is when we don't agree on the facts at hand. And the fact is, you know what? The shoe bomber was after 9/11. I'm sorry, you can put it on a calendar. That's not a fight.
You can't do anything about that. There's no response. And what it does is it muddies up the waters. And unfortunately, there is an audience out there that will follow, whether it's Rudy Giuliani, Michael Steele, or Tiny Todd
Tiny Todd T-Art.
That's hard to say. I admire you for that. There are people out there, unfortunately, who follow this and who believe in death panels. And I think, there's a certain degree of exploitation here. Because I do think that, Rudy Giuliani, Michael Steele, people in leadership roles should know better.
And we should maybe embarrass them into knowing better in public. I'll keep trying.
That's your job.
David, I'm really happy to see you. Thank you for coming in. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.